here at University Stadium, trying to make even further back history than we've made this year already. I think they're a very good team. You look at the teams they've lost to; they've all been on the road to two teams that are ranked in the top 10, and then obviously Hawaii's a tough trip traveling all the way out there. I think they're pretty damn exceptional on offense. I think this quarterback I really like, Bryson Barnes. I mean, he's a good thrower. He's good with his legs too. Their offense is fairly similar, even though it's a different coordinator, to the offense that New Mexico ran last year. Barnes probably isn't quite maybe quite as fast as like Dampier, but he's a good runner. But he probably throws it better, than Dampier. So he's a good player. Defensively, I think Avenger, who's here, is really a good player. They've done a solid job. They're strong and physical up front. I think they're good on special teams, so it's going to be a tough matchup. You got to play well, but it's a great opportunity in front of us.
You talked a little bit about it after the game Saturday, but in terms of obviously Bronco being there after he was here last year, how do you kind of strike the right balance of, hey, this game is really important to the fans, but it might not be as important or might not be as felt by, frankly, the majority of players?
Yeah, I think for certain players, it might be a bigger deal, and I haven't asked too much of Gabe Lopez or Pierce or those guys how much it means to them. I would think it means a little bit more, but I don't know. But for all the new guys, the majority of both rosters, I don't think it's any different than the game. Obviously, I think both the coaches want to win. Probably more than the average game.
You touched on Barnes, really productive running it, throwing it, high completion percentage. I think it's 2 INTs at this point in the year.
He's good.
I mean, how do you approach a guy like that who can do so much to kind of hurt you?
He's good. I'm concerned, and they do a great job. I mean, some of the stuff last year, they're getting empty, but they're getting an empty to run the quarterback. They do RPOs with quarterback run, which I think is hard because you don't really have a mesh that limits you. I mean, you can throw it sometimes late. He's dangerous. I'm very concerned about how we defend them. We've got to really try to mix up looks for him, keep him off balance because he's an excellent player.
Coach, the Utah State team averages, I think, 34 points per game. How do you avoid getting in a shootout with this type of offense, high-powered team?
Well, I think we got to win the game however it unfolds. I think you look at what it's taken to beat them. I think the 3 teams that have beat them have scored over 40 points. So I think you better be ready to score some points in this game and try to keep up with them. It may have to be a shootout to beat them because they do a good job on offense. But obviously, you want to play as good as you can be in all 3 phases. You got to get some hidden yardage and win the special teams battle in a game like this. But I think he's definitely one of those quarterbacks. You ain't gonna shut out this team. They're good. You got to play well and find a way to outscore them, whether that's 49 to 48 or 28 to 27.
And Barnes has been sacked, I think, 24 times this year. Does that mean anything to you into the pass rushers that UNM has at its disposal?
Yeah, I think we'll have to play well up front. I mean, I think their O-line is solid. I think he's such a good, confident player that there's times where, he may be holding it, trying to make a play and not throwing it away. They're kind of surprising. Their third down numbers are not as good as you would think. When you just watch the flow of the game, they haven't been great overall on third down. And I'm still trying to figure out exactly why that is because, I do think they're definitely a team that thrives off being balanced, and they're great on the 1st and 10s and things like that. But, I think that maybe can give us hope if we can get them in some third and longs that can be an advantage for us.
Going back to Sean's question, based on the nature of college football now with the portal and players leaving all the time now coaches leaving after 1 year, is it naive for fans to think that there should be any kind of loyalty just among that, and does that affect what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, obviously fans can think what they want to think, and obviously the fans root for the front of the jersey more than the back, and I'm sure there was fans who were disappointed when he left after 1 year. Don't count me in that group, though. I was glad he left because I wouldn't be here if he had left. So don't count me in that group. So I don't know. It definitely coaches have always been this way. I mean, coaches. Dennis Erickson, who was kind of the guy who got Idaho going. I mean, I think he left to go to Idaho and went to Wyoming for 1 year, and then he went back somewhere else. So I mean, coaches have always been able to do it. Now players can do it with the same, the same deal. So I think it's hard on fan bases probably because you can't get as attached. But I think that just revolves your commitment of who you're really rooting for. You're rooting for the program. You're rooting for the name on the front of the jersey, the Lobos, or in their case, Utah State, and it's because players are going to come and go probably more than they used to.
I know there aren't a ton of guys that played a ton last year and they're still playing for you this year. But I mean, guys like Richard Pierce, Gabe Lopez, David Murphy. How much are you kind of leaning on those guys to maybe gain some sort of competitive advantage?
Those guys might have a little bit of extra motivation this week, which I told the team that I said that's great. If that gets you a little bit more fired up and ready to practice this week, that's great. But I don't think Richard Pierce, leaning over to Caden Robinette and telling him, hey, play a little harder for me this week because this is my old coach. I don't know if that's really going to carry over to the guys who weren't here, but I do think so. I'm not really leaning on them to motivate other guys through that, but if that provides them with whatever provides you with extra motivation to prepare your tails off and play your tails off, I'm here for it. I think that's good.
What about from like a tactical standpoint? I know that they don't exactly have the same coordinators, everything that were here last year, but if they're doing some of the same stuff offensively, can you kind of glean anything from that?
Yeah, I think you can. I certainly think I would say that they're kind of like the New Mexico team was this year. I think they're more of an offensive team. They're ranked higher in most of the categories in the conference on offense than they are defense. I think they try to do a good job of not giving up big plays on defense, keeping the ball in front of them. I think they're probably very comfortable, winning a game. Like last week, 30-25. I don't think they're trying to win games, 14-10 or anything. But certainly, again, you see carryover in special teams, you see carryover in defense, you see carryover in offense from last year, which, none of it'd probably be different if we had 3 assistants who stuck around from that. But players have mentioned to us, hey, this is how we coach this thing up, or this is how they taught this, which, can that help us a little bit? I bet it can.
On the broadcast angle, it looked pretty good. Have you been in contact with anybody at the league about the Triswicky's 34-yard field goal, or have you looked at it more?
I looked at every angle they had. I did not turn it in to question it because I didn't think any of the angles were conclusive, and the guy underneath probably has the best view of anybody. So, what can you do? I didn't like the. So much of that stuff is inconclusive unless you have. We have pretty good angles. I think we certainly have more angles than we had when I was coaching in FCS ball, but it's still not the SEC game of the week where you have every angle. I did turn in. I thought maybe we didn't get a great spot on DJ McKinney's play at the end. I thought, well, there's no way. I don't think we necessarily got it, but I thought it should have been inches, and they made it a full yard. And I turned that in, and they said, I think it's a good spot. Can't really tell. So, so much of that stuff you just don't have conclusive. I thought watching the video, Lamont's knee was down. I don't know. Even when they tell you it was a bad call and they made it, it doesn't really do much more.
No catches for Sean or Ziel last week. I think really for Ziel, it's been 2 games without a catch. Sean had only one the last couple games as well. How important is it to get guys going? Especially in a game where you're going to kind of need to score some points.
Well, everybody's got their own, role, and I do think last week we had kind of a concerted effort to run it, and we started off running the ball better than we had, which takes away, some throws. I also think probably in the hierarchy of guys getting going, we're designing more stuff for DT, we're designing more stuff for Keegan. So, I think those guys can still get their plays, but they're probably not getting a lot of plays where they're the number 1 guy in the progression. Now, the way football is, teams a lot of times key coverages take away your top guys, so they got to keep running their routes hard and being in the right spot. There were some times last week where maybe those guys weren't always in the right spot for where they should have been and screwed up the concept. I think their plays will come, and I have confidence in those guys. If the ball comes to them, they're going to make the play. But I think the reality of it, just how our offense is evolving, there's probably not many plays in the game plan with those guys in the number 1 receiver, and they do a great job with their role.
I know you've mentioned in the past that you're kind of superstitious when it comes to uniforms. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on the turquoise that you're rolling out this week.
I like it, and again, I'm I'm superstitious, but I try to keep that to myself as much as I can, and my own stuff that doesn't affect people. The players love the different uniform combinations. I mean, they love, they even debate with each other, what we should wear and what colors we should have and that type of thing. So I think these are really cool. Again, I like embracing the local part of it, with turquoise kind of being a big color in this state. So I think it's awesome. They look good. I mean, I was. It was something I thought, because I noticed when I was here like last winter, I was going to all the basketball games. They got like 3 or 4 different color uniforms and stuff, and I kind of brought that up in the meeting. I said, we need to get an alternate uniform, because I think those are cool and you can market it, and people get excited about it. And I'm excited that we got that to fruition of making that happen, because uniforms, especially because the football team's so big, they're going to be a more expensive thing to get.
Before Rick goes, the last game we wore it was in 1979, and we won. So technically, we have a 46-year winning streak in those uniforms, and it's technically correct, which is the best kind of correct.
How many years did they wear turquoise for? Was it
73 to 79.
That was a turquoise streak.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's so nice, dude.
There's a tendency, I think, to think among coaches, everybody knows everybody. But had you met Rocco before media day in Vegas? And how familiar were you with him?
No, I had not met Brock, and I really met him. We had head coaches meetings in May. They were in Arizona. May or April, might have been the end of April. That was the first time I had met him in person, so I did not know him. I got some indirect information from their DC about this job. When I was trying to do my research on it, I didn't know him personally, but I have a real close friend who worked with him, Howell. So I got some information, but I don't think I really know anybody that personally on their staff. But obviously respect what he did. He did a good job at BYU and a good job at Virginia. But that's all I didn't know him on a personal basis at all. I know the receivers coach too. The receivers coach, Denarius McGee, played at Montana State. He's really the only guy on the staff who would say that.
Rocco's known to be pretty influential as a defensive coach. He was here with Rocky, but he developed the 3-2-5, but he doesn't run anymore. You don't run it. But were you aware of him as a coach? How influential he was?
I was aware of him as a coach. I didn't realize he was a defensive coach until later on, because you don't see a Rocky Long influence in their defense. You don't. And again, I never really studied those BYU teams or the Virginia teams he had. But you look at the New Mexico team last year, and you see their team this year. It looks a little bit more of an offensive team. So I didn't even realize he was a defensive coach now. Credit to him, he's been a head coach for, I don't know when he got the BYU job, probably 20 years. Long time being a head coach.
Obviously, Richard didn't play. Are you expecting him to be back this week, and what's that kind of look like?
He's gonna practice today, so we'll see how he looks and things.
And then I think Kader Jope has played just like 2 snaps on the year. Is he healthy? What's kind of going on with him?
We're going to pursue a medical redshirt for him. He just did not, he had broken that bone in his leg, and it just did not come back. I mean, he was medically cleared, but it didn't feel good, and he's not running the way he usually can run, and so you kind of got to the point where we hit the halfway point of the season. We had to make a decision on him, so we're not planning on playing him the rest of the year. I think we're pretty optimistic. He has a great case because he only played, I think he played 1 play in each of those 2 games, that he would qualify for a medical redshirt and be able to come back next year when he's 100%.
Have you made any other? You talked about it a little bit earlier in the season. Have you made any kind of redshirt decisions? Anything else beyond Jope at this point?
No, I don't think, it doesn't sound like initially that Buckley is going to qualify for a medical redshirt, so we got to try to qualify for a bowl game and then get him back for the bowl game. So if we get him one more college game, no one else. I think you look at our freshmen who have played in more than 4 games. I think Jamar, CJ McBee, and Ziel. I believe Ja Torres has played in more than 4, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But I'd say those 4 are definitely on track to play the whole year. We're getting down to with this being the 5 more games in the regular season. Obviously, for guys who haven't played, next week it's open field to get those guys in and try to see if they play. So if they haven't basically, if they don't play this week, you haven't played in the game yet, I mean, you preserved your red shirt with it being 4 games or less. So it's a little different, you know, these days than it used to be. It really just gets to like once a guy hits 4 games, it's like are we going to play him again, and are you going to play him not? And if they're playing key snaps that matter to the game, I always want to play him.
Coach, this Utah State running attack, Miles Davis, I think he had 460 plus rushing yards. Javen Jacobs, another running back with 400 scrimmage yards. They use him as a slot wideout. What have you seen from this running back room and how they can be dangerous?
I think they're solid players. You know Jacobs, who was here, I think averages over 5 yards a carry, and Miles Davis over 6 yards a carry. So I mean, they do a good job with them. They definitely want to run the ball. I think that's still the starting point of what they do. I like their offense. I think they have a very good offense. Does a lot of fun stuff with motion. Does good stuff with empty. I mean, they're I'd say just it's my personal choice, but I like their offense more than like a San Jose State or Hawaii offense. I just think they do a lot of fun stuff with moving people around and doing good stuff.
Time to watch the tape and kind of digest a little bit more. What kind of were your final thoughts on the reshuffled offensive line with some of the guys like Solon getting in and all that?
I thought they did a solid job. I was disappointed. I think we're playing a little sloppy with their technique at times, which I think was what led to some of those holding penalties. We got to have a little bit better focus in key situations. Our false starts were 2 were in the red zone and 1's in a 2-minute situation. Kind of key situational times where they probably hurt you more than a typical drive. But I do think those DNs are good. We gave up a sack to number 9. I don't think 34 had any sacks, and I think those those 2 pass rushers are pretty darn good as a combo. Number 5 from Boise was really good, but I think they didn't have quite the same rusher on the other edge. They made it up being some of the best combo of 2 DNs in the conference. So I thought we played solid. I liked how we ran the ball physically, and it was good to see some guys step up. I think Nev's got to keep pushing to play harder. He played his most snaps, and I think that affected him getting tired sometimes, not finishing plays the way you want to. So that's something you got to keep working with. A, getting him to play harder, and number 2, maybe spelling him enough to keep him fresh so he can play hard.
A similar vein too. Obviously, it was much more advantageous, taking and running and all that. What were kind of your final thoughts on Jack's performance as well?
I thought he played well. I think he made good decisions. He didn't force the football. He didn't. And again, I even look back at the sack he took on the 4th and 6. Better to take a sack than throw a pick that sets up a big return and gives them great field position. So I think he played well. I really liked how he used his feet, both the zone read that he pulled. I did tell him trust your speed and just run at the end. I think he could have gained 5 more yards if he wasn't looking back and that type of thing. And then I thought 2 of the bigger plays in the game, I think it was like a 3rd and 5 and like a 3rd or 8 and 9, where we called the drop back pass. Did not force it when it was well covered and used his feet and got first down scrambling. So I thought much more than what we wanted out of Jack than what we saw the week before. So that was great to see.
The 3rd and 9 was right before McKinney scored the 22-yard touchdown.
Yeah, big play.
Was the zone read, was that his call, or was it called by the coach?
It was a called zone read. No, usually we hand those off, probably the majority, but they chased hard. We usually try to formation those to give us the best chance of getting the ball in the quarterback's hands, but that was I believe it was a tempo play, which I think led them sometimes to not being on the same page defensively with how they were playing it, because they had DN Chase, but they had nobody kind of falling back to take that spot, and he did a great job holding it.
Coach, you've had a couple opposing quarterbacks throw for 17 completions in a row. I think this last week 13. Is that a concern so much to get him out of the rhythm, or as long as it's in the flow of the game, they're not hurting you? Is that as much of a concern?
No, I think we got to put pressure on the quarterback. I think we need a little bit more consistency out of our D-line play. I think you look at, we've been highs and lows. We played great up front, had a bunch of sacks against New Mexico State, and then didn't get a lot of pressure on San Jose State's quarterback. Then I thought we had 11 TFLs with our D-line against Boise, and we had 2 TFLs, with our D-line. So, partially credit to Nevada for blocking us up better. And they were probably, I'm sure they caught their their attention, and credit to them and their own line coach for getting those guys ready to play. But we need to have more consistency. I think we got to keep doing a good job of mixing coverages. I think we need to keep improving, our zone coverages. Most of the yards we gave up in that game were, leaky spots and zones, and I thought the quarterback did a really good job of finding the zones. He was a pretty good runner, so a lot of times if you're playing a running quarterback, and that's kind of the same thing with this Barnes guy. You like zone coverage better because you have more eyes on the quarterback, and everybody sees him when he runs. Where when you're playing man coverage, your eyes on your man, so sometimes you don't see the quarterback when he runs, so it's tougher to come off your coverage and get there. So, that's a dilemma we got to keep improving in our zone coverage.
You touched on it earlier too. You said you like to keep them to yourself. What are your kind of superstitions at this point in the season?
I wear the same outfit if we win, so I wear the exact same outfit to the game that I wore last game. That's probably my biggest one that ties into like winning. I go to the same place for lunch with my wife on Thursday before the game. If we win the game, I change it if we lose. It's probably my biggest ones that I go with winning and losing that I change. I usually don't. All I have is coffee and water before game day.
Even a night kick?
So I like that's another reason I like 1 o'clock kicks a lot better than 8 o'clock kicks.
So
that's why I'm like, she wants me to talk to like the radio show, and I'm like, I need like something to eat or something to drink before I talk to the radio show. Parched.
All right, so Jackson and you, there's a lot of talk about the father-son, coach's son thing. Your dad was here this weekend. I'm curious, do you and your dad still have conversations after every game, like a coach and a coach's son?
I wouldn't say every game, but he gives me feedback. He when my fourth down, going for it in fourth down doesn't work, he always mentions that. But like last week where we got 3 over 4, he didn't say anything to me, but he always brings it up that doesn't work, that he thinks I go for it on fourth down too much. But he's from that era where he didn't go on fourth down as much, so he gives me his feedback on that. He'll always break down some other game for me too, and tell me how some other teams screwed it up, and give me a little case study to learn from and things. So yeah, I get a few coaching tips from him.
Anybody else? Way in the back, hold on.
Coach, the fourth downs, watching the Lions, they passed on a chip shot field goal, 4th and 3 or something like that. You went for the 4th and medium at midfield. Where does your aggressive nature come from?
It really is just trying to, I like numbers. I try to look at things of what gives you the best chance to win. And I don't love punting when you pass midfield because obviously you're teaching your punters to do different things there. I mean, most we really I don't think even have called our pin punt yet this year, which is the punt where you're not trying to kick it as far as you can to try to pin it into the red zone. And especially when you're inside the 50, when I think the one we got sacked on last week was like the 42 or the 43. If you kick it into the end zone, you only net a 20-yard gain, and that's willfully. You're giving them the ball. You have 0 chance of retaining the ball, and you pick up 20 yards. Where a 4th and 6. I'd have to look up the exact numbers, but I want to say probably 4th and 6s are converted somewhere around high 30s, 40%. You have a chance of extending the drive. So that's like the one at the end of the game. I know 4th and 1s, I think this year in college football are converted at a 73% clip. So you have a 73% chance of ending the game on that play. If that 27% chance where you don't get it, you still have all the times where your defense gets a stop. It doesn't allow a field goal. So I look at it like in that situation, we're probably close to a 90% chance of winning the game if you by going and then also trusting your defense to get a stop. So I try to I don't know, it's like a little bit. I was never a big poker player, but all that stuff was going around when one guy won the World Series of Poker. It was like off the street and everyone followed it. And there's a lot of math. Chris Moneymaker. There's a lot of math to that stuff and trying to make the best decision. So, and I just generally believe too. fortune favors the bold, and you're aggressive. You know, I think our defense did a great job, and I think there's some psychological things, because I talked to the defense about it too, and I tell the team, we're going to go for it a lot because I have confidence the offense is going to make it, and I have confidence the defense is going to get a stop. And our defense did stop them on that drive and hold them to a punt. I think they've been outstanding this year when we've given the defense sudden change opportunities. I think that's been a strength of our defense, whether it was the muffed punt where we got a hold during the game, or the fourth down stop during the game. They did a good job at both of those situations.
Anything else? The Lord blesses you with 4 downs. Use them. I like it.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Jason.